I was standing on the front porch of the house I'd lived in for 9 years, holding two garbage bags, while my ex-husband watched me from behind the glass door with a small smile on his face. The locks had been changed overnight. My key didn't work, and every single neighbor on that street saw it happen. That was the morning Damien decided I owned nothing. He was wrong. If you've ever had someone treat you like you were nothing after you gave them everything, drop a heart in the comments. And if this story sounds familiar, stay with me till the end, because the twist is one I still can't believe happened. Don't forget to like, share with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. My name is Emma Rodriguez. I was 38 years old, standing on a sidewalk in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in November, with a thin jacket and two black garbage bags that held whatever Damien had decided I was allowed to keep. A ceramic mug I'd bought in college, some clothes, a photo album he probably threw in by accident. That was it. 9 years of my life packed into two bags by a man who couldn't even look me in the eye while he did it. He just left them on the porch and changed the locks sometime before I woke up. I remember staring at my key like it had personally betrayed me. I tried it 3 times. The third time I just stood there holding it, not because I thought it would magically work, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Mrs. Calloway from across the street was watering her plants even though it was 40 degrees outside. She wasn't really watering them. She was watching me. I could feel it without looking up. That was the part that broke something in me that morning. Not the bags, not the cold, not even Damien's face behind that glass. It was the watching. The witnesses to my humiliation who would say nothing, do nothing, and remember everything. I had met Damien Holt at a work conference in Indianapolis 11 years before all of this. He was charming in that specific way that feels like warmth when you're lonely. Attentive, funny, the kind of man who remembered small details about things you'd said weeks ago. I was 27, newly relocated, didn't know many people in Indiana yet, and he made me feel like the most interesting person in any room we walked into together. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. I said yes on a rooftop in downtown Fort Wayne, with fairy lights strung overhead and his whole friend group watching, and I genuinely believed I was the luckiest woman alive. I think about that girl sometimes. I want to reach back through time and just hold her hand for a second before everything started. The first year of marriage was good. I won't pretend it wasn't. But somewhere in the second year, things began to shift in ways that were so quiet and so gradual that I kept convincing myself I was imagining them. He started making small comments about how I spent money. Not arguments, just comments. Little observations delivered in a gentle tone that somehow always left me feeling ashamed. Do you really need that? That's a lot for a candle, Em. I just think we should be more careful. I made good money. I was a senior coordinator at a logistics firm, and I paid exactly half of every shared expense. But somehow, over the course of about 18 months, I went from a woman with her own accounts and her own financial independence to someone who felt like she needed to justify every personal purchase to a man who never once justified his own. He asked me to quit my job in year 3. He framed it as a gift. You're exhausted, Emma. I make enough, just take some time. And God help me, I did it. I gave notice on a job I'd spent 6 years building because my husband told me I deserved a rest, and because some part of me wanted to believe that was love. It wasn't rest, it was a leash. Within 4 months of leaving my job, every account we had was solely in his name. The joint checking account I'd contributed to for years got consolidated for simplicity. My name came off the car insurance. Little things, reasonable things, things that individually made sense, and collectively built a cage I didn't notice until the door was already shut. The house was purchased in year 4 of our marriage, a 4-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Drive that I picked out, that I decorated, that I planted a garden behind every single spring. Damien pushed hard to put it only in his name. His reason was taxes. His accountant, he said, had recommended it. I almost agreed. I was so deep in the pattern of deferring to him by then that I almost signed away the one thing that would later save me. But something stopped me that day. Some quiet, stubborn part of me that hadn't fully gone to sleep yet. I told the closing attorney I wanted both names on the deed. Damien went tight in the jaw but said nothing. The attorney typed my name in without blinking. I didn't know then what I'd just done for my future self. I had no idea. The marriage didn't end with a fight. That's what people don't understand when I try to explain it. They expect screaming, thrown dishes, some dramatic moment where everything finally breaks open. But with Damien, it was quieter than that. It was a slow erasure, and by the time I understood what was happening, I had already been mostly erased. Year 6 was when I first started feeling it in my body. This low, constant hum of anxiety that lived right under my sternum. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding for no reason I could name. I started having stomach problems. My hair was thinning. I went to 2 different doctors who both told me I was stressed and should try yoga. I didn't tell either of them about Damien because I didn't have the language for it yet. I just knew something in my life was making me physically sick and I couldn't figure out what. He never hit me. I want to be clear about that because I know some people will wonder. What he did was different. It was the kind of damage that leaves no marks you can photograph. It was the way he'd go completely silent for 3 days if I said something he didn't like. The way he'd bring up my family, my mother's financial struggles, my brother's past mistakes, in the middle of unrelated arguments, casually, like he was just making conversation. The way he'd say, "I'm not angry, Emma, I'm just disappointed," in a tone that made disappointment feel worse than rage. His mother, Vivian Holt, never liked me. She made that clear from the very beginning, just never directly. She was the kind of woman who communicated disapproval through tone and timing rather than actual words. A slight pause before answering a question I asked. A compliment aimed just slightly past me at Damien. She once told her son, within my earshot at a family dinner, that she hoped he had a prenup. She said it like I wasn't sitting 4 feet away eating her pot roast. Damien never defended me. Not once. Not in 11 years. By year 8, I had no job, no independent income, a shrinking social circle, and a husband who had convinced me, so thoroughly and so quietly, that I was lucky he stayed. I believed him. That's the part I'm still working through in therapy, how completely I believed him. I found out about Courtney on a Wednesday afternoon in March. I wasn't snooping. I want to say that clearly because Damien later tried to reframe the whole discovery as me going through his things. I was looking for the car insurance card because we'd had a minor fender bender in the parking lot of a Kroger, and I needed the policy number. I opened the wrong drawer in his home office and found a receipt from a restaurant I'd never been to. Dated Valentine's Day? 2 people, wine, dessert, the whole evening, signed with his credit card. I sat on the floor of that office for a long time, then I started looking. And once I started, I couldn't stop. 8 months. The receipts, the hotel points on his account, a second cell phone I found in a coat pocket that still had a text thread open. Her name was Courtney Mays, and she was 31, and she had apparently been in my husband's life since the previous July. 8 months of dinners and weekend trips, and I later learned conversations about their future, a future that had apparently already been planned out and that apparently did not include me. He served me divorce papers 11 days later, not at home, at the Fort Wayne Public Library, where I volunteered 2 afternoons a week because I'd taken that up just to have somewhere to be. A process server walked in between the reference section and the periodicals and handed me a manila envelope in front of Margaret, the head librarian, who was 64 years old and had known me for 3 years and didn't know where to look. I stood there holding that envelope with both hands like it was something I might drop. Damien's attorney had already filed. The paperwork was thorough and aggressive in a way that told me this had been prepared for months. There was a financial disclosure attached that listed the house as his sole asset. My name wasn't anywhere on it. He had simply left me out of the document entirely and apparently hoped I wouldn't notice. That night I called my younger sister Petra, who lived in Columbus, and I cried so hard I couldn't speak for the first 4 minutes of the call. She just stayed on the line, didn't say anything, just breathed with me until I could form words again. "Come here," she said when I finally could talk. "I can't," I told her. "I can't leave the house. If I leave, he'll do something." I was right about that. I just didn't know how right. 8:14 p.m. I stayed in that house for 3 more weeks after the papers were served. Damien had moved into what I can only assume was Courtney's apartment because he was barely home, but when he was there, it was unbearable. We didn't speak. We moved around each other like furniture. He'd come in late, go straight to the bedroom he'd started sleeping in alone, and leave before I woke up. The house felt like a waiting room for something terrible. My coworker Colby, who I'd stayed close with even after leaving my job, kept telling me to get a lawyer. Every time we talked, she said the same thing. "Emma, please, just call someone. You cannot do this alone. I kept putting it off because I had no money of my own. Damien had slowly, methodically ensured that, and the idea of calling a lawyer felt like admitting it was really over. Like as long as I hadn't legally fought back, some part of me could still pretend this was a nightmare I'd wake up from. Then one Thursday morning I woke up, and he was gone. Not just for the day. Gone. His clothes from the closet, his toiletries, the framed photo of him and his college roommates that had sat on the dresser for 7 years. Gone. And on the kitchen counter there was nothing. No note, no explanation, no conversation, just absence where a husband used to be. I found out about the locks when I came back from a grocery run 2 days later. My key hit the deadbolt and stopped. I stood there on that porch in the November cold, and something in my chest just went hollow. I tried the key again. Then I knocked on my own front door like a visitor, and Damien opened it 4 inches with the chain still on, and looked at me through the gap like I was a stranger asking for directions. "You need to get your things," he said. His voice was completely flat. No guilt, no discomfort, nothing. "I had the locks changed this morning. Your bags are on the porch." "Damien." I couldn't even finish a sentence. "The house is mine, Emma. My lawyer made that very clear. You have no claim here." He closed the door. I heard the deadbolt turn. I stood there for, I don't know how long. Long enough for Mrs. Calloway to give up pretending to water her plants and just openly stare. Long enough for a car to slow down on Birchwood Drive and then keep going. Long enough for the cold to work its way through my jacket and settle in my bones. I called Petra from the sidewalk. She drove 3 hours from Columbus that same afternoon and didn't say a single word about "I told you so." Which is the thing I love most about my sister. She just put my garbage bags in her trunk, bought me a coffee from a drive-thru on the way out of Fort Wayne, and let me cry the entire drive back to her apartment. I slept on her couch for the next 6 weeks. She had a 1-bedroom, and the couch was too short for me to fully stretch out, and the springs in one cushion were broken, and I didn't care about any of it. I was so hollowed out that physical discomfort felt almost irrelevant. I'd lie there in the dark after Petra went to sleep and just stare at the ceiling and try to figure out where exactly the woman I used to be had gone. I ate ramen 4 nights a week because it was what I could afford with the small amount of cash I had left in a personal account Damien hadn't known about. $260 that I'd saved over 2 years by occasionally asking for cash back at the grocery store and tucking it into an envelope in my coat pocket. It sounds pathetic. At the time, it felt like the only thing I'd done right. His lawyer sent over a quitclaim deed in the 3rd week of November. It arrived by certified mail to Petra's address. I still don't know how they got that address so fast. Which told me Damien had been planning this for longer than I wanted to think about. The cover letter was professional and cold. It explained that since the property had been purchased primarily through Damien's income, I was being asked to formally relinquish any claim to it. There was a line at the bottom for my signature. There was a return envelope already stamped. I read it twice. Then I set it down on Petra's kitchen table and went and stood at her window for a long time, looking at the parking lot below. Something felt wrong. Not emotionally wrong. Everything was emotionally wrong. Legally wrong. A specific, quiet wrongness that I couldn't fully articulate but couldn't ignore either. I went back to the document and read it a 3rd time. And then I remembered something. The closing. That day 4 years ago, when I'd insisted on putting my name on the deed, and Damien's jaw had gone tight and the attorney had typed my name in without blinking. I dug through the folder of documents I'd managed to grab before the locks were changed. Thank God I'd had the instinct to take that folder. And I found the deed, both names, right there in black ink. Emma Rodriguez and Damien Holt, joint tenants. I sat down very slowly on Petra's kitchen floor. He had sent me a quitclaim deed for a house I already legally co-owned, banking on the fact that I didn't know my own rights, that I was too broken and too poor and too scared to look closely at the paperwork. He had bet everything on my ignorance. I didn't sign it. I called the legal aid hotline at 11:47 that night instead. Sitting on Petra's bathroom floor with the door closed so I wouldn't wake her, and a tired but kind paralegal named Jody walked me through what joint tenancy meant and what I was entitled to, and what my next step needed to be. I wrote down everything she said on the back of a Kroger receipt because it was the only paper I could find. That receipt sat in my coat pocket for the next 4 months like a small, quiet weapon. I found a real estate attorney named Gerald Foss through a referral from the legal aid office. He was 61, semi-retired, worked out of a small office above a sandwich shop on Calhoun Street in Fort Wayne, and he had the kind of quiet, unhurried energy that made you feel like he had seen every version of this story before and was not even slightly impressed by Damien's tactics. He wore the same brown cardigan to every single meeting we had. I found that deeply comforting for reasons I can't fully explain. I sat across from Gerald in that small office on a Tuesday morning in early December and laid everything out. The deed, the quitclaim request, the financial disclosure from Damien's lawyer that had erased my name entirely. Gerald read everything slowly, without expression, turning each page with the careful patience of someone who was in absolutely no hurry. Then he set the papers down, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at me. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, "your name is on this deed. That's not an opinion. That's a recorded legal fact in Allen County. Your husband cannot sell, transfer, or refinance this property without your signature and your consent, period." I had known this intellectually since the night I'd called the legal aid line. But hearing it said out loud by a man sitting behind a real desk in a real office did something to me that the Kroger receipt hadn't quite managed. Something in my chest loosened just slightly. Not relief exactly. More like the first small breath after a very long time of shallow ones. "He's already listed it," I told Gerald. Gerald's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "Listed it for sale?" I found out 4 days ago. Colby saw it on Zillow. 4-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Drive. Listed at $389,000. I slid my phone across the desk with the listing pulled up. "He's been telling people the sale is already in progress." Gerald looked at the listing for exactly 5 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and called someone. I sat there while he had a brief, professional conversation with what I gathered was the listing realtor's brokerage. He didn't raise his voice once. He simply informed them, in the tone of a man reading a grocery list, that the property at the Birchwood Drive address was jointly owned, that the co-owner had not consented to the listing, and that proceeding with the sale would expose the brokerage to significant legal liability. The listing was frozen within 48 hours. I didn't tell Damien. I didn't tell anyone except Petra and Colby. I just went back to that couch in Columbus and waited. Gerald had told me to say nothing, do nothing, and let him work. Staying quiet was the hardest thing I had done in this entire process, and this entire process had been extraordinarily hard. It took 11 days. 11 days of silence, of not knowing, of waking up at 4 in the morning with my heart hammering and my mind running through every possible way this could still go wrong. 11 days of Petra making me eat actual meals and Colby texting me terrible jokes at random hours just to make me respond so she knew I was okay. Then my phone rang on a Thursday evening while I was washing dishes. A Fort Wayne number I didn't recognize. Emma. The voice was sharp, clipped, and instantly recognizable even though I hadn't heard it in months. Vivienne Holt, Damien's mother. "I need to speak with you." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Vivienne had never called me directly in 11 years of marriage. All communication had always gone through Damien as a kind of buffer. When she wanted to tell me something, she told him and he told me. When she disapproved of something I'd done, she told him and he delivered the message with just enough distance that she could never be directly accused. The fact that she was calling me herself, without that buffer, meant something had happened significant enough to collapse her system. "Vivienne," I said carefully. "The house listing." Her voice was tight with a specific kind of fury that I recognized. Not the hot fury of someone who has just been hurt, but the cold fury of someone who has just been made to look foolish. "It's been frozen. My realtor called me this morning. Something about a co-owner dispute." A pause that felt razor-edged. "Damien told me that house was fully his. He told me that months ago. He told me the equity from that sale was going toward a property we were going to purchase together. I have already told people about that money, Emma." She stopped. The silence between us was dense. $40,000, she said finally, and her voice had dropped into something quieter and more dangerous than anger. "I told my sister. I told my book club. I told 3 people at my church that I was going to help them purchase a lake property in Michigan this summer." Another pause. "Are you telling me my son lied to me?" I looked at the soapy dishes in the sink. I looked at Petra's small kitchen. I thought about 2 garbage bags on a cold porch, and a key that didn't work, and a man watching me through glass with a small smile on his face. "I think," I said slowly, "that we should meet in person." We met at a Panera Bread on Coldwater Road on a Saturday morning. I got there 20 minutes early and sat in a corner booth facing the door because I needed to see her come in before she saw me. I needed that small advantage. I needed 1 second to compose myself before she could read my face. Vivian walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. She was 71 years old, small-framed, silver-haired, dressed in a camel coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget back when I had a monthly grocery budget. She scanned the room until she found me, and then walked over with the precise, controlled movements of a woman who had spent her entire life making sure no one could ever read her body language. She sat down across from me without taking off her coat. I had the deed in a manila folder on the seat beside me. I had rehearsed this moment probably 40 times in my head over the previous 3 days. I had imagined crying, freezing up, losing my nerve, apologizing out of old habit, the way I used to apologize to her son for things that weren't my fault. I had prepared myself for all of it. What I hadn't prepared for was how tired she looked. Not physically tired. Tired in the way that people look when they've been carrying something they didn't expect to have to carry. There were shadows under her eyes that her foundation hadn't fully covered, and something in her jaw was set in a way that looked less like composure and more like someone holding a door closed against strong wind. Neither of us spoke for a moment. A young woman came to take our order. We both ordered coffee. We both waited until she left. "Tell me what you know," Vivienne said. Not a request. I opened the manila folder and slid the deed across the table. She looked down at it. I watched her read it. I watched the moment her eyes found both names. Emma Rodriguez and Damian Holt, joint tenants, recorded with Allen County, because her face did something I had never seen Vivienne Holt's face do in 11 years. It went completely still. Not the practiced stillness of composure. The involuntary stillness of shock. She read it again. I let her. When she looked up, her eyes were different. Something had shifted behind them that I couldn't fully name. It wasn't grief exactly. It wasn't guilt. It was the specific expression of a person recalculating everything they thought they knew about a situation they believed they had fully understood. "He told me his attorney confirmed it," she said quietly. "He told me there was no dispute, that your name had never been on the deed, that you had signed something at closing that gave up any claim." She paused. "He was very specific about it." "He was lying," I said. I didn't say it with anger. I was too tired for anger by then. I just said it like a fact because it was a fact. Vivienne looked back down at the deed. Her coffee arrived and she didn't touch it. "He listed that house without my knowledge or consent," I continued. "My attorney froze the listing 4 days after it went up. Damien cannot sell that property, cannot refinance it, cannot transfer it without my signature. He knew that when he listed it. He knew that when he told you about the $40,000. I paused. "He used your plans, Vivienne. He made you promises he had absolutely no legal ability to keep." Something moved across her face, quick and painful and gone almost before I could register it. But I saw it. She picked up her coffee cup and set it back down without drinking. Her hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. "My sister is expecting that money," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "She's been budgeting around it for 4 months." I didn't respond to that. It wasn't my problem to solve, and we both knew it. "Why didn't you fight back sooner?" she asked suddenly, looking up at me. "Why didn't you tell someone what was happening?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was unkind. It wasn't, quite, but because of who was asking it. This was the woman who had called me a gold digger at a family dinner. The woman who had watched her son quietly dismantle me for years and said nothing. The woman who had communicated her disapproval of me through 11 years of small cold gestures and had never once asked Damien to treat me better. I looked at her for a long moment. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," I said finally. "The people who knew him best seemed pretty convinced he was a good man." She heard what I wasn't saying. I watched her hear it. She looked away first. We sat there in that Panera for another 20 minutes. Vivienne asked several careful questions about the legal process, about what Gerald had filed, about the timeline. I answered them honestly and without embellishment. I wasn't there to perform my pain for her. I wasn't there to make her feel guilty, though I imagine she did. I was there because she had called me, and because some part of me had understood, when she called, that this woman's fury might be useful in a way that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with practicality. Vivienne Holt did not like being made a fool of, not by anyone, not even by her son. When she finally stood to leave, she buttoned her camel coat slowly, methodically, not looking at me. Then she paused with her hands on the back of her chair. "I've been paying his legal fees," she said. It wasn't a confession. It was information, delivered in a flat tone, pointed directly at me like a door being left slightly open. I nodded once. She left without saying goodbye, but as I watched her walk across that Panera toward the exit, her silver hair neat, her posture straight, I noticed that the set of her jaw had changed. The door she'd been holding closed against the wind. I think she'd just decided to let go of it. Gerald called me on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the Panera meeting. I was sitting in Petra's car in the parking lot of a Dollar General in Columbus because I'd started taking walks when anxiety got bad, and this particular walk had ended here, in front of a Dollar General, which felt about right for where my life currently was. Something's changed on their end, Gerald said. He had the same unhurried tone he always had, but there was something underneath it this time. A quality of careful satisfaction, like a man watching chess pieces move exactly where he expected them to go. Damien's attorney contacted my office this morning. They want to discuss settlement terms. I pressed my back against the car seat and stared at the Dollar General sign. What changed? I asked, though I already had a feeling. His funding situation appears to have shifted, Gerald said. Their filings have slowed considerably in the last 2 weeks, the kind of slowdown that happens when retainer payments stop coming in. A pause. Do you have any insight into that? I thought about Vivienne standing at that table in her camel coat, her hands not entirely steady, telling me she'd been paying his legal fees in the flat tone of a woman leaving a door open. Some, I said. Gerald made a small sound that in a more expressive man might have been a laugh. Well, whatever the reason, they're ready to talk. I'd like you to come in Thursday. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after we hung up. A woman pushed a cart past my window with a toddler sitting in the front basket eating a cracker. Normal life, just continuing. I watched it and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the faint outline of what happiness used to feel like. The suggestion of it, like seeing the shape of sunlight under a closed door. I called Petra first, then Colby. Colby screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Thursday came. I put on the nicest outfit I still owned. Dark trousers, a cream blouse, boots I'd bought 2 years before everything fell apart. And Gerald picked me up because I still didn't have a car and I wasn't going to ask Petra to drive 3 hours again. He didn't comment on any of it. He just handed me a coffee from the sandwich shop downstairs and said, "Ready?" And I said yes, even though every part of me was shaking. The meeting was at a conference room in Damien's attorney's office building on Jefferson Boulevard. Damien was already there when we walked in. He was sitting on the far side of a long table in a gray suit. And the first thing I noticed was that he looked older. Not tired the way Vivienne had looked tired. Older in a harder way, like something had calcified in his face. He looked at me when I walked in, and I held eye contact for exactly 3 seconds, and then looked away first because I chose to, not because I had to. His attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Caldwell, opened by presenting a revised settlement offer. It was better than anything they'd proposed in the previous 3 months, meaningfully better. Gerald reviewed it without expression, made 2 small notations in the margin, and slid a counterproposal across the table. What I wanted was not complicated. I wanted my fair share of the home equity based on the current appraised value. I wanted my name properly accounted for in every financial record related to the property. I wanted my legal fees covered. I wanted a clean exit with no further claims from either side. I did not ask for anything punitive. I did not ask for anything designed to hurt him beyond what was fair. I had thought about that deliberately and decided that revenge shaped like greed would make me feel worse, not better. The negotiation took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Gerald was extraordinary. Calm, precise, immovable on the things that mattered, and flexible on the things that didn't. Caldwell pushed back twice on the legal fees, and Gerald simply waited her out both times with the patience of a man who understood that silence is a negotiating tool. At one point, Damien leaned over and murmured something to Caldwell, and she shook her head slightly, and he sat back and said nothing else for the rest of the meeting. That small exchange told me everything about where his position actually was. The number we settled on was $94,000. My share of 9 years of equity in a house I had picked out, decorated, planted a garden behind every spring, and been locked out of on a cold November morning with 2 garbage bags and a key that didn't work. $94,000 and a clean legal severance. Gerald slid the final document across the table. Damien picked up a pen. I watched his hand. It didn't shake the way mine had when I'd almost signed that quitclaim deed on Petra's kitchen table. His hand was steady. But his face, His face was doing something complicated and private that I don't think he meant for anyone to see, something that looked underneath all the composure, almost like the face of a man finally understanding the weight of what he had done. He signed. Dine-eyed but when I'm dumb. Adina Bulbidid. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect a moment like that to feel like winning, and it didn't feel like winning. It felt like the end of something very long and very painful. It felt like finally being allowed to put down something extraordinarily heavy. It felt like the first full breath after years of breathing shallow. Gerald walked me out to the parking lot afterward. The November air had that particular cold clarity that Fort Wayne gets in late winter, sharp and clean and almost brutal in its freshness. I stood on the sidewalk outside the building and just breathed it in for a moment. You did well in there, Gerald said quietly. You did all the work, I told him. He shook his head once. You did the work 4 years ago when you put your name on that deed. I just reminded everyone it was there. The check cleared on a Friday afternoon in February. $94,000. I was sitting at Petra's kitchen table when my phone buzzed with the bank notification, and I read the number 3 times because some part of my brain kept expecting it to disappear, kept waiting for some final trick, some last-minute reversal that would snatch it back. But it didn't disappear. It just sat there on my screen, real and solid and mine. Petra was at work. I was alone in her apartment. I put my phone face down on the table and sat very still for a long time. Outside her window, the February sky was the color of old pewter, flat and heavy. The kind of sky that feels like it's been there forever. A pigeon landed on the fire escape railing, looked at me through the glass for a moment with its small orange eye, and then flew away. I cried. Not the desperate, drowning kind of crying I'd done in the early weeks on that couch. This was quieter. This was the kind of crying that comes when something that has been clenched inside you for a very long time finally, slowly, lets go. I sat at that kitchen table and let it move through me, and then I wiped my face and made myself a cup of tea and started looking at listings. Not in Fort Wayne. I was done with Fort Wayne. I looked at smaller towns within an hour's drive, places where I didn't know the streets yet, where no neighbors had watched me standing on a porch with garbage bags, where I could build something that had no Damien-shaped shadows in any corner of it. I found a house in Bluffton, Indiana, 40 minutes southeast of Fort Wayne, small enough that everybody waves when they drive past you, large enough to have a decent library and a farmer's market on Saturdays. The house was a 1920s craftsman bungalow with original hardwood floors and a deep front porch and a backyard that backed up against a small creek. It needed work. The kitchen was outdated, and one of the bathroom faucets had a persistent drip, and the back fence was leaning at an angle that suggested it had given up on being a fence and was in the process of becoming a suggestion. I put in an offer the same week, just my name on the paperwork, only my name. I stood in the attorney's office and watched them type Emma Rodriguez and nothing else, and I felt something so specific and so fierce move through me that I had to look at the wall for a second to hold myself together. I moved in on a Saturday in late March with Petra, Colby, and Colby's husband, who owned a truck. We ordered pizza and ate it on the bare living room floor, surrounded by boxes, and Colby kept saying, "Emma, this place is so cute, I hate you," every 20 minutes, which is exactly the kind of thing Colby says and exactly the kind of thing I needed to hear. Petra hung curtains in the bedroom before we even unboxed the kitchen and stood back to look at them with her hands on her hips like she'd just completed something important, which maybe she had. That night after everyone left, I sat on my front porch alone with a glass of wine. The street was quiet. Someone down the block had a porch light on, and moths were circling it in lazy loops. The creek behind the house made a small, constant sound that I could just barely hear if I was still enough. My porch, my creek sounds, my moths if I wanted them. Vivian texted me 6 weeks after the settlement. I had not heard from her since the Panera meeting. Her message was brief and arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was pulling weeds in my front garden. It said, "I'm sorry for what I called you." I sat back on my heels in the dirt and read it twice. The sun was warm on the back of my neck. A robin was doing something urgent in the oak tree at the edge of my property. I thought about 11 years. I thought about pot roast and cold silences and a family dinner where a woman said the word prenup 4 feet away from me like I wasn't there. I thought about a camel coat and unsteady hands and a door being left slightly open. I didn't respond right away. I put my phone in my pocket and finished weeding the garden. I made lunch. I read for an hour. I thought about what I wanted to say and whether I wanted to say anything at all. Late that afternoon, I picked up my phone and typed 2 words. I know. I sent it before I could second guess myself. Then I set my phone on the kitchen counter and went back out to my porch and sat in the chair I'd bought at an estate sale for $12 and looked at my street and my yard and my leaning back fence that I was slowly fixing on weekends, one post at a time. People ask me sometimes what the lesson was, what I took away from all of it. And I never have a clean answer because I don't think life organizes itself into lessons the way we want it to. What I have instead is this. I know what my name on a document means now. I know what it means to almost give away the one thing that was quietly protecting you. I know what it means to sit in a parking lot outside a Dollar General at the lowest point of your life and get a phone call that changes the direction of everything. I know what it means to rebuild from a number on a bank notification and a craftsman bungalow with a dripping faucet and hardwood floors that creak in the cold. I know what it means to sit on your own porch, in your own quiet, and not owe anyone an explanation for any of it. Damien has the house on Birchwood Drive listed again. I saw it on Zillow once by accident and closed the app immediately. He can sell it now. It has nothing to do with me anymore. Whatever he does with his half of that equity is his business and his life, and I genuinely, completely do not care. I planted a garden in the backyard of the Bluffton house last April. Nothing dramatic. Tomatoes, basil, some zinnias along the back fence because I read they're good for pollinators. The zinnias came up orange and pink and a shade of red so deep it was almost purple. And on a Saturday morning in July, I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee and looked at them and felt something so clean and uncomplicated that it took me a moment to recognize it. It was peace. Just that. Just peace. And it was entirely, only, irreversibly mine.